Hi, it's Luna. Welcome to Moth Eaten Reel's 31 Days of Horror 2024. It's day 10 and we'll be discussing the first feature film debut of director Chloe Okuno, 2022's Watcher. Let's talk about it. So the sum up is, young American Julia moves with her husband to Bucharest, Romania, home of Numa Numa and Dracula. I don't know how the Romanians feel about this association, probably the same way I feel when people mention the Queen and tea and crumpets, you know, somewhere on the spectrum of tired laughter and death stare, depending on how stinky their vibes are in general. But they move to Romania and Bucharest, and she is then alone most of the day, and so starts to then notice a looming presence from the opposite window of their apartments, and this happens to coincide with the time that a serial killer is loose. Is it him? Let's find out. It's him. As always, these are spoiler-filled reviews. I encourage you to watch the film yourself because, you know, even the bad ones have merits to them. But yes, full disclosure for spoilers. When I said thriller at the start, I'm gonna also give full disclosure that I almost disagree with this one. It's not what I'd expect going into a thriller film. I don't know if this is just me and I've at some point midway upon the journey of my life just decided my own definition for thriller. But for me, a thriller is something that has many twists and turns. This is straight-laced. I think that there's definitely lots of credit, lots of praise I could give to the way that the director then kind of does create this sense that, oh, maybe she is just paranoid, but it never fully commits to that in any kind of way that I was watching it thinking she's wrong, you know? I think throughout the film actually is on her side. A thing that comes to mind is, since I learned about it recently, giallo films and the way that then often they'll have their female lead be in a position that is a lot more, it makes you doubt what they perceive about the world around them. There'll be more alcohol, maybe like drugs, sleeping pills type things, and she is isolated and alone in a country where she doesn't know the language, but she is our main point of view. We never go to anybody else's point of view in this film, and so I think that makes us very on side. We open up with them in the taxi together, Julia and her husband Francis, and it's where we learn our first bit of Romanian, so we already get the kind of perception that she doesn't know the language yet, she's got that isolation, and she's already kind of being kept out of conversation. We're then invited into that conversation in the subtitles. It's one of those where there's a few moments of Romanian only conversation where the subs will tell us what's happening sometimes and not other times. So the film does then presume that the viewer is also on that kind of we don't know Romanian wavelength. And they're right for me. But now I do know one word, frumoasă, because the taxi driver says it means beautiful. I'll tell that to my Romanian friend and see how she reacts. But from the get-go, I do then find this to be like an interesting conversation to kind of keep in mind, you know. As I say, she's with her husband in the taxi, they're both in the back, and the taxi driver says this word and kind of like inadvertently teaches it to her because he's referring to her. He says she's beautiful, and her husband, when asked like what's he saying, kind of says, he hates you, he's joking, he's not taking it seriously. And I find it interesting to keep in mind because it is the kind of thing where then like, it's nothing that's immediately alarm bells, but it is the kind of thing that I find as a woman, it puts you like low-key on edge. There's just that inevitable little flicker of that guardedness that you end up going through the world with. But I really do like the opening shot as well, where we see the opening credits. I think that a few of the horror movies we've been through this with this project, 31 Days of Horror, they really make use of then just planting tension and imagery in just an opening credits roll that every time I'm like, ooh, oh, look at you, artsy. I really do like it. And for this one, so they move into their apartment, which happens to have a massive window, and we only really get a perspective of this when they're getting jiggy on the sofa, all happy to be moved into their new place, and it starts to pan out slowly. And that's when it dawned on me. I was like, it's a big window, isn't it, actually? As everyone's names are coming across. And then finally we then have Watcher pop up in this kind of scratchy red calligraphy that, for me, with those associations, kind of reminded me of maybe like an old-fashioned love letter, you know? The font itself looks rose-scented, but also in a kind of threatening way. And I think another thing that I like as part of this is, as the window's been zooming out and out, we are then the Watcher. What does that mean? Well, I'll talk about that later. Hi, it's Post-Filming Luna coming at you with the awkward little aside that I meant to mention at the start regarding how the title kind of like also accuses the viewers of also just watching, and how I feel like by the end it links back to the kind of like men defending other men thing, you know, when he says the joke about the spider keeping her company, but like she doesn't understand because it's in Romanian, and so his work colleague is like, oh yeah, he was just making a little joke. It was then the kind of accusing that also brings an audience culpability of, you know what, we don't always look out for each other, and especially in regards to the context of the film, how men also are also a bit like, oh, well, you don't know, you might be being paranoid, that kind of thing, how it brings that into it. Okay, goodbye. And I think it's this first night before the credits even start that she then sees this looming man in a window from across the way. Not doing anything, just standing. It kind of reminded me, actually, as a personal aside, of when one of my neighbours used to have a mannequin in their window all the time. They weren't like my neighbours, so I didn't know them, but I think they've moved out since, and they used to dress it up, different outfits for different times of the year. It reminded me of that, and I thought, if I lived in these kind of apartments buildings, I would probably put a mannequin in the window just to mess with people, because I'm horrible like that. But I think this is the first time that she sees the Watcher, as I will henceforth be calling him. So early on we get to see some snippets of her daily life. She is doing her best with her husband working all day to, you know, still go out into the world, learn her Romanian. She's got one of those little audio tape things of saying the English phrase and then the Romanian phrase back to her. That would be useless for me. I can barely understand English. I need the words in front of me and to learn in that way. But anyway, she's going to cafes, she's going to galleries, restaurants, and a museum, I think. They have a little Dracula figure at this museum gallery place, and she brings that home. And I think that it's not something that pops up again in the film, but I feel like then the director is using then that Dracula imagery to kind of then get across the idea of a threatening presence watching from outside the window. It's very in my mind. So she's, you know, practicing her Romanian on the barrister at the coffee shop. This is then, like, on the believable side of the spectrum, a capital city. So I think as English speakers, we do often have the benefit of a lot of places in, like, Europe especially. You can go to a capital city and actually, yeah, just expect that a lot of people who are working in places like coffee houses know enough English that if you're stumbling, they'll catch you. Well, it's just a fun little privilege. But she's getting on, she's learning her Romanian, but she's only just started, you know, and these silly little audio tapes are teaching her things like, I like to eat carrots, not super useful Romanian. And then we got this dinner scene that made me so uncomfortable. It reminded me, I hope this reference doesn't completely go over people's heads, but Taylor Swift did that music video with Sadie Sink for that song All Too Well, which was the entire narrative of like a girl getting into a relationship with a guy who was like a little bit too old for her and like had kind of like gatekeeping her out of conversations. This is what this dinner scene reminded me of somewhat, because the gatekeeping here is of course language again. And it then did frustrate me because I'm like, okay, but you all now are just speaking English to each other casually. Every time that you speak Romanian, it is giving that you want to keep her out of your in-jokes. And again, you know, the entire movie is from her point of view, so like, we are her, we are in that position, and so it was just an extra prickle of like, how dare you? Like, even if she were an obnoxious person, we're kind of like forced to be on her side because it's her view that we're seeing the world through. So yeah, this dinner scene, we already then get those inklings of these times where then her husband is maybe not quite as immediately supportive of her as he ought to be. And this is after the scene where she does then tell him quite immediately about her intuition about this guy that she sees across the road. And she then like does the whole thing as you would of then obviously being like, it's nothing, don't worry about it. But you know, makes him aware that she's a bit on edge. Because this is also after an incident where they go outside because there's sirens and there's a guy in a shock blanket who is then being interviewed, but they go home. When they see it on the news the next morning, she's then like still in that position where she's like, what are they saying? What's this about? How did she die? Because it's the first thing that we get to tell us about the fact that there's a serial killer around who's killing women. And the other thing about the dinner party is they mentioned that her head was cut off, and she said, like, you didn't tell me that. And this is where it starts. This is where the drama starts. I would much more call this a drama than I would a thriller, but this is where it starts because I'm then on his side as a viewer because I'm thinking, well, you know what? It's a news snippet. Realistically, or like at least believably within this universe, what are they saying? How a murder victim is killed every 2 seconds within an interview? No, so I believe him when he's like, well, they didn't say how she was killed when she says, you know, in an accusing tone of like, you didn't say that to me. But in any case, this dinner establishes a certain dynamic that she's got going on as she's moved to Romania. When she then takes a breath, you know, she's like, I need to go outside for a bit. She then runs into one of her neighbours in this apartment, and oh my god, she's gorgeous. I'm immediately rooting for them. Which, with my track record, means she's gonna die. But she meets her neighbour, Irina, who Julia insists on calling Irina, which is just like a teeny tiny petty little thing that I noticed and it bothers me, but it's fine, it's whatever. But she meets her neighbour Irina and they like strike up a conversation, and I'm like, she's definitely going to be an ally to Julia in the future. I hope they chat more. And they then say some things about, you're my next door neighbour. Can you hear me when no, can you hear me when we... They can. They totally can. They say they can't, but we've already then had it established to us through the visuals that yes, they can hear each other. But this is just a snippet of an interaction for now. Julia is your standard kind of true crime masochist girly, and she's looking up lots to do with the local serial killings. And one of the things that she finds is then an interview that has English dubbing over the top so she can understand it. And we have this nice scene of the kind of like bridging sound. So she is walking down the street after watching this interview, but the interview is still playing over the top. And the part of the interview that's still playing is actually a victim who's escaped. And she's talking about the way that she felt like she was always being followed. Even when she was alone, she felt like there was someone behind her. And because this is now playing over the top of Julia walking down the street, we then have this out of focus, tall figure behind her who's slowly coming up behind her. But it's only early in the movie, so obviously it's just creating tension. It's just a guy who's making his way downtown, walking fast, faces past, and he's homebound. So he just walks past her, but she then clearly has this haunting her in her mind because she's just jumping, she's feeling jumpy. And she decides to go to the theatre, you know, as I say, you know, she's spending her days trying to be cultured, trying to get out of the house whilst her husband's working all damn day. She even says to Irina about her husband not being home at some point when it's 10 p.m. and Irina asks, he's not home at 10 p.m, what is he, a stripper? And she can say that because we find out later, of course, that she is a stripper. I love the idea that she could have just been being really blunt, like genuinely curious, like, oh, is he a fellow stripper? I might know him. But no, when she goes to the theatre, an interesting bit of trivia, Micah Monroe, She is then the same actor who plays the lead in 2014's It Follows. And the movie that she goes to watch at the theatre is the same one that she was watching in It Follows. Just a wee bit of trivia there for you. As she's watching this movie, she's looking around because it's quite an empty theatre. It's the middle of the day, I guess. I don't know what kind of mouldering place this is. But she sat down, she's like a little bit still on edge because she's been flipping true criming it up. And then there's a guy behind her who, when she looks around and looks at him, he then is looking at her. But again, I do feel like they've planted enough going on that there is still at this stage that sense from me, the viewer, like maybe she's being paranoid. Because this happens then all the time for me, that I'm looking around. And then obviously, when you're giving out that nervous energy, people are going to respond to it. So sometimes you're looking and then you spot someone looking at you and you're like, they were looking at me, but they're probably looking at you because you're jumpy. And so we kind of still have that room to doubt how she's feeling, I suppose. But then, when she's watching the movie, this flipping guy looking at her does then do the absolute weirdo thing of then moving his seat, coming right over behind her, right behind her. Now that is just weirdo behaviour that is absolutely inexcusable. And we get this view as well. The camera pans to his shoes specifically, just as a kind of like, that's what she can see from her peripheral. And then, because he follows her to the shops after, and it's a thing that then is brought up by people around her doubting, men around her doubting her. They're like, well, you know, people gotta go to the shops. And it's like, no. He's a weirdo. We know he's a flipping weirdo. This is the thing that for me, I'm like, well, I'm just going to be keeping this in mind for the rest of the movie, that he moved specifically behind her in the theatre. Only weirdos do that. I think there are still scenes that they put in the shops that kind of do paint this picture where there's a sympathy for the men around her for saying, like, you're just really blowing this out of proportion. You're isolated, you're in a country where you don't understand the language, blah, 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 rationalise, rationalise, rationalise. And she does then, like, drop a whole flippin' jar of pickles. What a waste, by the way. But they go all over the floor and he kind of, like, walks over to them and then, like, looks around where she's gone and hidden herself in the staff rooms. And then she asks the person who's there, like, is there like a back door? And he does point her in that way. I don't know if that's what he says to her. This is again like untranslated Romanian that's happening, but he points in a direction that she runs to and does find her way out of the back door. And later on, like they go and they doubt her because she tells her husband again about this thing that has happened to her in the day. And I love the way that they make it seem so easy. Okay, so she tells her husband about this thing and she's like, you know, you could look at the footage and see what I mean. You can look at it for yourself and see what I mean. And he does. He goes to this little corner shop that this thing happened in and asks the guy who was there, like, can we see what's on the cameras? And he says yes. And I'm like, this is so bizarre. Like, can you imagine? Like, what if I had, like, I don't know, on the other end of the spectrum, what if I had a Romanian girlfriend and something happened in Tesco's Extra and then I walked in and asked, can we see the camera footage? Anyway, they do get to see the camera footage because it's a movie. Or just, they're really painting a friendly picture of Romania. A staff member and her husband are looking through this footage with her and she says like, right there, and then they're just kind of like, they're being friendly about it, but in that very head pat, don't worry your pretty little head, you know? Like, oh, it's obviously a coincidence. Oh yeah, well I'm sure he's looking at you because you just dropped this massive jar of pickles. So the next day, this obviously has really not comforted her at all, as it wouldn't. And then there's this knocking on the door and it's horrible because you know what, knocking is always horrible. It's so silly. But a ringing phone, knocking and alarms, they're just sounds that create tension, funnily enough, and it's not just me being an antisocial little Gen Z. The knocking is then like quite frantic and mixed, and you never know what kind of knock is going to come next. it's a good scene for then this tension that the movie is like really good at. Like I can't believe that this is then like her first like feature film debut. She's like clearly got a lot of influences she's drawing off of, and like is doing a real good job of it. But yes, she answered the door, and I thought it was going to be Irina. I thought it was going to be Irina, like, hey, come have a drink with me. But no, it is another one of the neighbours, and she is looking for her cat that she has named Elvis. But that is something that Irina is there for and has to translate, because it's another neighbour who can't speak English, and her mimicry, her little charades for cat is this. I wouldn't have got that. I'm like, you're looking for the Pringles man? I help. And apparently her cat goes missing all the time, is what Irina says. And then Irina invites her in for drinks. I knew it, and I'm so happy for them. And they come in, and this next scene is interesting to me because of the way I interpreted that there's room to interpret something from this, I think. But she invites her in, they have a nice little drink, because she's like, I want to stay out longer, but nobody else did, and I look radiant with vodka in me. I'm like, I love her so much. I fancy her, is what I mean. But yeah, they have a nice little drink together. Julia then opens up somewhat, and when Irina's like, well, you should just tell these people to fuck off, and Julia's like, I should, I'm gonna do that. But they're interrupted by more knocking at the door. This one is then just Irina's ex. We get more shouting that doesn't get translated from the Romanian for us humble non-Romanian speakers. And that's when then Irina says something along the lines of just like, he's a sweet guy, really. No, he's not a threat. If he did do anything, I would. Because there's then like a gun on the table next to her. And she's like, I'm serious. But the way that I then say that I feel this scene can be interpreted, right, so for clarity as well, when the scene happens, we don't know yet that she is a stripper, so we can take that part out of the equation. But I think that there is an element that kind of paints the idea that there's a stereotype that Eastern European women are tough, like they're really cutthroat, like you can't intimidate them. And I believe it, but I think that within this film, that stereotype is then something that feels then... I can't think of the word for it, but it makes then Julia look comparatively like a little weed, like she is helpless and somewhat then pathetic in the way that she can't handle herself the way that Eastern European women can. I don't know if that's then maybe like me looking into something that isn't really there, but the thing is, because of the isolation she's in throughout this film, Irina's the only other woman of her age that she talks to, like, ever. Even then, her husband's colleagues' wives don't talk to her. So they're like the only kind of friends. And so that definitely creates that kind of messaging for me somewhat, watching this scene. And just, yeah, the ultimate idea that Julia being soft and like, oh, I don't know, is her problem that she needs to sort out. And this conversation does then spur her to, when she goes home, open the curtains that she's been keeping shut. And it's still nighttime, so she can definitely see the watcher, the looming shape, the other side of the windows with the light behind them, who has been watching. I think just, you know, a tall figure is just... It's such easy flipping meat for a horror, you know, for just like, ugh, yes, indeed, a silhouette. I am scared. But then as part of this, like, yeah, maybe I am soft and maybe I do need to tell him to fuck off, what she actually then does is then put her hand to the window like, well, are you watching? Like, this is her test to validate herself. And then he doesn't do anything. Until she's about to shut the curtains, you know, she is like, I have been silly all this time, it's fine, it's nothing to worry about, it's fine, I've got my wine, let's go. And then she turns around and of course, he has been watching her, so his hand is then against the window. At this point, as soon as Frances gets home, she's like, I want to call the cops. I want to call the cops, please. And then we get more delicious, delicious drama, because of course then a cop comes round and it's just the one guy, so you know how not seriously they're taking it. And then Francis is like, okay, you know what, I'm gonna go over there. The cop's like gum chewing and just like, okay, yeah, I think I see the situation here. And so when Francis goes over, she's then like texting him, just like, okay, what's happening? He starts typing, then stops, and that's all we get. And then when he comes back, and he's just like, it's fine, like nothing's happening. And if something were happening, like, what would you want me to do? Is something that gets asked. And then later on, they then have a little flippin' shout at each other when he's just like, what do you want me to do? And she's like, I want you to fucking believe me. And again, he's then like, what can I do to help? And she says, nothing. And I do love the drama of this, because I do feel that it's something that is then like quite relatable to a lot of situations I see, to situations I've been in, where it is horrible because there is just some kind of like thing that you can't put your finger on. And so you're just like, I don't know what you can do. And you see it in this couple, and like I say, it's sad because he's just so very like, he's got that masculine thing where it's just like, okay, well, if you want me to do something, I will do the thing for you. And she's like, well, I don't know what to do. I just want to like be listened to and be believed. And it's what she gets out of then talking to Irina, but she can't get it out of Francis, who's at work all day and like wants to be understanding and wants to be there for her. Like at no point in this movie did I kind of like hate Francis until like near the end, but we will get to that. So at this point, she's now just like, well, I will take matters into my own hands. And so we get this big, long, silent, tense scene where she's now stalking the guy. She's stalking the stalker. And you notice at this point, interestingly, that he always seems to have this shopping bag with him. Or I noticed anyway. What could it be? He's not gone shopping. But she stalks him all the way to a strip club. And I really like one of the scenes in here. Like, again, you know, for all the ways that this film is then, like, not a kind of 5 out of 5 for me, spoiler alert, you've got an idea of my ratings by now. Like, damn, when we get a 5 out of 5, if we get a 5 out of 5, you're gonna get an hour-long video of me rabbiting. Anyway. There's a scene where she is like pressed against a gate that's got this spiral on it, and one of her eyes is in this spiral, and I'm like, wow, at this point, what does the spiral symbolize? Is she like spiraling, or is she the eye of the storm? Who does she find at the strip club? It's Irina! And apparently this guy that she's been stalking is like a janitor at the strip club. But yeah, Irina uses her break to then reassure Julia. They have a nice little chat where Irina's like, I've got your back, basically. She kind of like says a few things as well that are still in that zone of like, I don't know, maybe like you are unreasonably scared, but like she's still listening to her as she says this, and she also even then says as well, it's like, but what do I know? I'm used to being watched, because it's the kind of strip club where all the girls are in like glass boxes and dancing. And it is that night that she has a dream where she is smothered by a pillow, and it's not obviously a dream to start with, but it's obviously a dream. And I do tend to hate those fake out dream scenes, but in this instance, you know, it serves a purpose. We, again, are obviously fully in Julia's perspective, and so having this kind of thing be on her mind and on our mind is important going forwards. Same as her when she's listening to all these interviews about the serial killer around. But she hears a scream and a smash through the walls that she's like, oh, I can't hear anything. Yeah, you can. She heard a scream and a smash and a meow that... I'm sorry. So, those of you who know me through other bits on the internet know I have this really daft little cat, Tilly, who has the most studio sounding meows. And I called out for her because when there was this meow on the screen, my partner was all like, that wasn't Tilly, that was on the TV, but I thought it was her. So I called for her and was then overwhelmed with meows. But anyway, funnily enough, it was then a meow. When she gets the whole neighbourhood up to then like go investigate, she got the landlady and she's like, I heard a scream and a smash, you have to get us in there. She does, and then funnily enough, it is empty apart from the bloody cat, Elvis. But we have a little cut where she is looking at the wardrobe that is ajar, and there's nothing specifically suspicious about it. But you as a viewer at this point know that it's a horror movie and all of these little shots are going to mean something later. The landlady then tells her husband something that we don't get the translation for again, but you can hear the words hysterical. That tends to be very the same sounding across European languages. And he tells her later, yeah, she says she just doesn't want neighbours that cause trouble. It's at this point you get the hint that even though I said what I said about the fact that hysterical is probably the same across a lot of European languages, she then uses the words like of course she doesn't want hysterical people here. And so that's kind of like a subtext for she's still going on with her Romanian lessons. The guy Irina's involved in, he then comes round and Julia takes the opportunity to chat to him, just like, oh, well, I haven't heard from her, like, what's all this? He says, I was meant to meet with her at her apartment, but she didn't come home after work, although that's something that she often doesn't do. He's still also in this frame of, like, nothing is triggering alarm bells for him. They chat, and then after finding out that neither of them know where Irina is, even after then Julia says, like, okay, what if I called her? I'm thinking, what's this gonna do, you know? She's now gonna get an unknown number as you type it into your phone. But it means that then we actually get to hear from inside her apartment her phone ringing. So it actually, for some reason, seems to make both of them think, oh, well, she is in there, she just doesn't want to talk to anyone. The guy is like, well, if that's it, but she's like, oh no, is there something you can do for me? And so they go across to the apartment where she thinks this guy is, and he bangs on the door, and then this other guy completely comes out, but then we see Shopping Bag Man, the Watcher, climbing the stairs. This then leads to a scene where the police are called again and they come to the door, and it's apparently him who's called a complaint on her for her harassing him. And at this point, yeah, unfortunately, her stalking him to the club and then to his apartment and banging on the door, that's enough for the cops to be like, can you two just shake on this and, you know, move on, move forward. And yeah, so they shake on it. And I think it's later that night that Frances then shows her, oh yeah, they caught the serial killer, by the way. So yeah, like that's the end of that. This then leads to the part where I hate him because, as I say, you know, he's been working late nights, he's a big business boy, and his work has a function. I don't remember what it's for, you know, some jobs just have a lot of functions just to show off that they can, I feel. What do I know? I'm just a humble little internet pleb. And in this scenario, it's a little bit different from the dinner for me, where, you know, it's a bunch of, like, work colleagues at, like, this whole work party, so I wasn't as upsetty on her side for, like, oh, they're still chatting Romanian in front of her, knowing that she can't understand and be involved. But, oops! She has been keeping up with her Romanian because there's a joke his colleague says and he laughs and she's slowly puzzling it out loud what they said, and it's something along the lines of his joke being, oh, at least the serial killer could keep her company, referencing the fact that clearly he's been talking behind her back and not taking everything she's said entirely seriously. And the thing, when he says this, the thing is, one of the women that the camera focuses on does give him a look. Like, I don't think that we saw this woman before, I may be wrong, but yeah, she's then someone who at least looks appalled at him, whilst all the lads are defending him as well, and he's all like, oh, it was a workplace joke, and one of the guys is like, oh yeah, it was an office gossip. But as I say, you know, she's puzzled out what he said, and then it's enough that, as you would, makes her just leave like, okay. And he runs after her, and he just says like, I'm just sick of your fantasies, I'm just tired of them. And so she goes home alone, and then we have a really nice, delicious, tense scene where, again, you know, it's all slow burn with this film. She's going through an underpass, she's going through all these kind of like creepy, isolated locations, grungy with city grime, And then on the train, on the underground, there he is again. And he comes over to her once the train is like delayed conveniently. This is just convenient. It's not like this guy could stop the trains. He is just some guy still. Just a murderous some guy. Although, again, I feel like the film does a good job stringing us along for, like, maybe she is just paranoid and xenophobic. But he then has this conversation with her where he says, like, oh, no, I'm just alone in my apartment all day looking after my sick father, the person who opened the door to Arena's. It's complicated, guy. Anyway. And he's like, oh, when you waved at me, I thought maybe someone sees me. And so he's almost like cutting like a sympathetic figure, or at least someone who's kind of sad loner enough that you feel more pitying than frightened. She asks him, like, what do you want? And he's like, I think I was just hoping for an apology. And she says, I'm sorry, but then rushes off ASAP because all this time we then keep getting this focus on, obviously, the underground train, which is already a frightening thing by itself. Nobody believes me, probably because the people I keep telling this to are Londoners who, you know, grown up in this, like, grime and squealing and rumbling. But I feel like I really relate to my cat when she's scared of the Hoover when I'm on the underground. It's a scary machine. I've got to really use, like, my big human prefrontal cortex to be like, it's fine, it's just a train, it's just transport. But they're scary. And I feel like that kind of atmosphere is used really well in this scene where, like, you know, again, it's another isolated place. You can't really call for help on these kind of carriages. But anyway, she rushes off because all this time it's been focusing in on his bloody shopping bag. It's got a little corporate smiley face on it for whatever supermarket it is, and these bulbous shapes. Now my partner says, oh, I knew what they were, and I'm like, I didn't. I'm like, what are those? Massive melons? But she rushes off, rushes home, and at this point I am like, okay, but like, what is happening? What's happened to Irina? Julia's packing her bags until subtitles inform us that there's Romanian song playing in the distance. It's not in the distance, it's from Irina's apartment. So she goes over there, and she then is got by the bloody shopping bag because in the middle of the floor is Irina's decapitated body. She got. And she gets then smothered. Julia then gets smothered by the flipping smiley face of the shopping bag. It was heads inside the shopping bag. I really apparently should have been able to see that, but it wasn't until I saw Irina's decapitated body that I'm like, oh my god, he's been carrying the heads around. She tries to scream and call out for help, but her voice box is severed, or I don't know, it might not actually be her voice box. I, funnily enough, do not go around decapitating people, and so I don't know what it is. But the side of her neck is severed, and so she's like, you know, losing a lot of blood, and she's on the carpet. And then there's a scene that is very much a thumbnail for the film, I think, where she is on the carpet, one arm's in the air, one's to the side, and he kind of lies on the floor next to her, chasing cars style, and then kind of like holds her hands so they make like a little steeple together or an arrow. And she seems to have bled out to death. And so he gets up just in time for Francis to have also come home and seen the packed bags. But then he comes outside after then ringing her phone and hearing her ringtone in Irina's apartment, just as the Watcher is walking out. So make eye contact. He's kind of strolling towards him. But then, bang, bang, it's Chekhov's gun. It's Chekhov's gun. It's Irina's gun, but it's Chekhov's gun. She's got up. She wasn't dead. She was just playing dead. In like quite a flippin' mad scene where I really thought she was dead though, because when she was on the ground as well, when he gets up at first, there is then the other side of the building, a little girl watching them. And so it looks like when he's going out to get out, he's on his way to go murder the little girl, you know, no witnesses style. Yeah, we get the best I told you so shot when she then comes out the door with the gun. Roll credits. I hate the idea that, like, you know, I'm all optimistic or like naive or whatever you would want to call it, but I really feel like I want to believe that a lot of human experiences can relate to us all. That's why they're human experiences. But I do feel like there's something about this movie and being a woman that just there's a lot of that comes through the idea like of the protag who is just like they're not believed, or also like I do then feel like there is that gendered thing, like I said, until he made that joke in front of his colleagues. I wasn't like against Francis. I didn't think he was the worst. I did just recognize those patterns of like frequently socialization wise, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I'm not like a socialist channel or anything, but for me and just my human experience and just like what's around me, I do feel like he's very on that train of like a masculine, like, okay, well, if you want me to do something, I will do something, but frequently then as just a girl, you also just want to be listened to. You just want to like know that you're protected. Another thing I didn't mention, there's a scene where I think it's the second time that she mentions the Watcher. He kind of makes a move on her. He makes this joke of like, well, if he does come around here, you got your big strong man to protect you. But I think that it's an important scene, and that's just why I'm like rambling again about it now, is because like it's that awkward thing again, which I relate to on a level of like, this isn't enough of a joke. Like, I'm not just being silly. This isn't a silly moment. You can't be making a move on me when I've just told you this thing, you know? Because in the scene, she literally ends up jumping away and apologizes, like, sorry, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know what's up with that. Like, it's just not the time. And I think it's another thing that really establishes their relationship as something where just he's then not in tune enough with her and what she's saying to him. But anyway, I really liked the movie. I think that it's quite exciting to know that this is a feature film debut, so I'm like, damn, what's Chloe Okuno gonna do next? But yeah, for me, I'm gonna say like something that sounds unfair with the way that I've said about all the positives of the film, and that is that I rate this 3.5 stars. I think there's just something for me about films that have just a very isolated protagonist. It frequently creates this kind of like atmosphere where this is again going to sound like a negative, but I zone out a lot. It doesn't then quite hit all the notes that make me want to kind of rate it higher, you know. But it is a very, very good 3.5 stars, okay? That's what you need to know. Please join me for day 11 of 31 Days of Horror, where we go into a beautiful, gothic, Beauty and the Beast, lavish animated feature from the year 2000. See you then.